I wish I had known that one of the biggest skills I and almost everyone entering the world hoping for any kind of interesting and exciting career, the skill that does not get taught and the one that I needed is people skills.
Hello and welcome back to A Higher Purpose, a Vanderblumen podcast. I'm your host, Brett Connolly, and joining me as she does every week, every episode, my co-host, my co-worker, my co-friend, Sarah Gonzalez in the house.
We're back.
Isn't that our slogan?
That's our
We're
slogan.
so back.
We're so back. Every episode, we're so back.
We need to work on something else, but I like it.
I know.
I like it.
It's not as cool, but we'll work on it. We'll work on it.
Yeah. But this is going to be a really good episode this week. We have a really awesome guest joining us, and man, I don't even think we need to have like side banter. I think we should just
jump in.
Jump in.
It's gonna be great.
Man, as you probably know, we can do intros. We think it's way more interesting when the person does their intro and just sharing their passion for where they are, how they got there. Man, and I was reading this person's bio, and she's done a lot of neat stuff in her career. And so, Karin, thank you so much for joining us. This is Karin Klein. We have a brand new book coming out talking about rethinking college. And Karin, thanks for hopping on the pod today.
Thanks. I'm really happy to be doing this. I am an editorial writer for the Los Angeles Times. I have been for 22 years.
Wow.
I've been in journalism, daily newspaper journalism for next year. It will be 50 years.
Wow.
So yeah, it's been a long time. And I have, as you said, a lot of interests. I have done within journalism, a lot of editing, a lot of reporting, and then moved to opinion writing. But I also have a lot of outside interests. So my first book actually has nothing to do with this one. It's called 50 Hikes in Orange County because
I saw that.
I got into hiking and getting into hiking got me interested in learning more about nature. And so I took the courses to become a certified naturalist.
Wow.
And I'm a naturalist for the Orange County parks. And so that led to this book, the hiking book sort of dropping into my lap. Someone, a publisher, wanted a book written and found me, and that's how that happened.
Wow.
And so I've written about education a lot. I think I've covered education either as a reporter or as an editor for pretty much every year that I have been a journalist, starting with my little teeny tiny paper in Northern California. So this was a topic that is very different from most of what I was writing about. We get really involved in topics like school reform, charter schools, standardized tests, so on and so forth. And every once in a while, a bigger issue sort of comes into your mind. And this one came into my mind actually almost 20 years ago, and it just kind of simmered for a long time. And it started when I started hearing stories of people who were very qualified to do the jobs that they had done for decades with great references, who were fantastic at their jobs. And then they moved to a new city and they couldn't get a job because there was an automatic cutoff. If you weren't a college graduate, you were not, they wouldn't even look at you. They didn't care what your skills were.
Yeah.
They didn't care what references you had. You just couldn't even make it past the gate without a bachelor's degree. And I'm thinking in particular of an office manager. And I was sitting there thinking, really, has office management changed so much that you can't do this after doing it for 30 years? I think she'd been an office manager without having a bachelor's degree. So that started things sort of going in my mind. And then after a while, I started hearing about organizations that weren't just accepting bachelor's degrees. They were saying, you need to have a graduate degree in order to join our professional staff and to get anywhere here. And most of the people who then went and got the master's degree would say, I didn't know anything more after the master's degree than I knew before it. Even the colleges were admitting that their people were just as qualified with their bachelor's. So this is something that was going on in America since about the turn of the century, a little bit later, when we had an oversupply of college graduates. And it's called degree inflation, which means we're going to demand more college education, more education, whether the job really calls for it or not, which is a shame for a lot of people because not all people have equal access to a college education.
Right.
And at the same time, there's a lot of talent out there and a lot of skills out there that are being completely wasted. So all of this was turning around in my mind, and I was talking to a relative about, I don't know, 10 years ago, who was telling me about the Swiss system, where a lot of the students do not go to college very intentionally, and they have a system set up for them where they become apprentices. And I'm not talking about the skilled trades, they have those too, but these are white collar apprenticeships in hotel management, in bank management, in all kinds of, HR, customer service, things that here are requiring bachelor's degrees. There, what they do is for the last 2 years of high school, students go to school part-time to take their core courses. And other than that, they are apprenticing at a business that does what it is they're interested in. They are paid for these apprenticeships. And after high school, they might or might not need an extra year of training, but then without spending a fortune or 4 years or more on a bachelor's degree, they're doing the same jobs that people here are doing with a bachelor's degree, and they're doing them fine.
That's
Yeah.
interesting.
So they're proving that we don't really need a bachelor's degree for all those things.
Sure.
So I started writing about that. I started talking to some Swiss families and looking at our system because it just made so much sense to me, especially as I saw school districts starting to require students to take all of the courses required to go to a 4-year university. And in California, where I live, there are very specific requirements. There's a thing called the A through G set of courses that students have to take in order to qualify to go to UC, the University of California. And they had to get at least a C in it because that qualified you. And I was sitting there thinking, so what if they don't take a third year of math or a second year of this? Maybe there's one thing that just isn't for them, that doesn't fulfill the A through G requirement. Or say you can't even graduate high school if you haven't done that. I thought that was a little crazy and very unfair to students who might be very talented, but maybe didn't have skills that worked with that particular academic framework.
Yeah.
And we have to admit, public education is great, but schools have a fairly narrow band of talents that they are looking for. Those are classroom academic talents. There are people with all kinds of creative, entrepreneurial, networking, mentoring, all sorts of skills that are very desired out in the workplace that will really get them places
Right.
who aren't set for a degree.
Right.
So after the pandemic, I wrote a piece about that. I wrote a column for the Sacramento Bee about this. And then after the pandemic, we were on the editorial board taking a look at what might life be like after the pandemic if we really started rethinking things. So I revisited it. I did an editorial on degree inflation. I found a Harvard Business School report that talked about how bad degree inflation is for everybody. It's bad for employers. It's bad for employees. By the way, I found one source that said 40% of new college graduates are underemployed. That means they are working in jobs that don't really need a bachelor's degree.
Yeah.
Even, we're not talking about the ones that require it, even the ones that don't require it. So we have this surplus of college graduates who don't really know where to go in life to find themselves, who are underemployed. We have people who come out with a bachelor's degree and they have their resume and they think that's going to be it. And they go around to employers and they drop off their resume and they get no response. And meanwhile, other people who have all kinds of skills and all kinds of experiences can't get into the jobs that they need. But also it's bad for employers because when a college graduate is underemployed, they start looking for another job. They want a job that they feel is fitting with their education.
Right.
Whereas someone else will stay and they will train and they will learn more and they will be a more loyal employee. And turnover is a bad thing for businesses. It costs a lot to keep hiring people.
Yes.
Yeah.
We have to look at where the degree inflation came from, which is that the graduates were there, and also it's lazy hiring. HR departments or employers who didn't want to look at that broad band of all those resumes that were coming in, and you really kind of can't blame them. We're just using the degree as a way to do a cutoff. It's like, we just can't deal with this many applicants. So let's first just slice off all the people who don't have a college degree. And they're missing out on great people.
Yeah.
So I wrote those two pieces, and then it happened coincidentally that there was an editor at HarperCollins who was interested in the same topic and wanted a book on it and wanted to find an author who was qualified to write it. So
Wow.
I can't really take credit for the book because it was just sort of out there and offered, and I
Yeah.
sent in clips and said, this is something I've cared about, and it just all happened very smoothly.
Yeah.
That's
So,
awesome. I love how
guess
that
it
works
was
out.
meant to be.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I also saw there was an article back in 2015 that you wrote about bacon. So if you ever write about a bacon book,
We'll read
I
that
will
one
read
too.
that one as well. Okay. So feel free to send me that one.
I did a lot of medical and health writing, and I
Yes.
really do feel that journalism often does a poor job of translating studies to the audience. So that, the bacon study was it was interesting because there are two different ways of looking at the numbers. And when you look at them, you might say, yeah, you have a 50% greater chance of getting this if you eat whatever. And maybe the chance was 1% and you just made it 1.5%.
Right.
But you can spin it this way.
Greater,
yeah.
But it's still ridiculously small.
Sure.
Yes.
So that matters on a public health level, but it doesn't really matter to the individual.
Sure.
Sure.
So anyway,
No,
sure.
that's so
I'll
funny.
talk to you about bacon and the study that said that champagne helps prevent Alzheimer's.
Interesting.
All right.
Yeah, it doesn't. Believe me, it doesn't.
Oh, okay. Okay.
I assumed not.
And it was strangely, you can't imagine, it was funded by the champagne industry.
That's so
What a
wild.
coincidence.
I
What a
never would have guessed.
coincidence.
Never would have guessed.
That's awesome. Well, thank you for sharing kind of your road to getting to this book. I was going to ask, how did you gather this research? But it sounds like your career, your life work has kind of been leading up to the fruit that's in this book of seeing different things like that. And I wanted to ask you, you write a couple stories in here, but what's one story that you would want to share with our audience of kind of the proof of rethinking college and really what made you excited to write that story in this book to be able to say, this person didn't have a degree and this is where their career took them?
There are so many great stories of people who don't have degrees and are carving out terrific lives. And often that means they're making really good salaries. Sometimes it doesn't mean they're making great salaries. They're making certainly livable salaries, but they are finding community and meaning in what they're doing.
Yeah.
So I don't just define success by what you're taking home in the way of a paycheck. It's what you're taking home in the way of people and creativity and fulfillment in your life that I think really brings about happiness.
Yeah.
Not that I think anyone should have to worry about housing or food or things like that. So a couple that come to mind, one that's just so dramatic that you can't help loving it, is the woman who built a business in public relations from her yacht. Writing about the yachting industry.
Yes.
And this is not some privileged person who had yachted all her life or anything like that. She's just a person who loved travel. She had a job with the government. She's Australian. She had a job with the Australian government arranging the travel for the military. That's how she met her husband, who was in the military. And they just lived their very middle-class lives. They had 2 young sons. And they were watching Netflix one day and they saw this documentary about the youngest woman to, I think, circumnavigate the globe in a boat. And they looked at each other and said, we can do that. And most of us would say, we could do that, or honey, one day let's think about doing that.
Right.
But these people really acted. They went on a savings program where they stripped everything but the necessities out of their life, saved, took on extra work when they could. And after a couple of years, they had saved up enough money to buy a yacht. So they went off yachting and that was great. And after a couple of years, they ran out of money. So they said, well, that's not working out. We need a way to make this sustainable. And the woman liked writing and she loved yachting. And she figured she could build a public relations agency out of their interest in yachting. That was particularly for the yachting set. And there's a lot of money when you're talking about the yachting industry and all the
Sure.
things that go with the yachting lifestyle.
Yeah.
So there they were on their yacht. When I interviewed her, they were anchored off one of the Greek islands and, just jumping into
Casual.
the
Yeah.
Yeah.
into the sea, this beautiful, clean, clear sea, any moment they wanted to, and making a good living. Her husband took care of the boat, and he homeschooled their sons.
Wow.
And they had been looking, they were looking for a bigger boat. I think things were getting a little cramped with 4 people on a boat. But that's one of the really dramatic ones. But there are people like the sound designer for so many major Hollywood films. His name is Wiley Stateman, and if you look him up on IMDb, you'll just be sort of stunned by the number of
Hmm.
big name films that he's done.
Hmm.
And he was dyslexic. His parents were college graduates. He was dyslexic, but beyond that, beyond his difficulty learning to read, he perceived the world through sound. He was very sound sensitive. He said his favorite thing as a kid was that his dad gave him an LP in those days of just different sounds and, bats and airplanes and whatever. He just loved it and he played it over and over and over again. And he came out to Hollywood, and Hollywood didn't have any jobs, so he went to Utah where there was some kind of little studio doing some little things, and he was good with technology, so they took him on because he knew how to fix the machines. But that enabled him to get into sound for
Yeah.
films,
Yeah.
and he built up from there. And he would just walk into film studios, into sound studios, and became just a huge success, and started his own business, sold it for a lot of money, gave his employees a ton of that money. He still is doing sound design. He still has his company. But what was great about him was that he really is doing what he loves. And after talking with him about sound, I was started thinking about sound all the time. I was thinking about sound for like 2 months afterward, all the time. I was very aware of sound because he's just really into sound. And he said this thing about, sound is so ephemeral because you can stop a movie and the picture is there when you freeze it, but the sound isn't. The sound is gone. Sound is that ephemeral.
Yeah.
And I started thinking about that. I'm like, wow, I never thought about that before.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But
They
then,
they say how comedies and horror movies are only separated by the sound and the music.
that makes so much sense.
Isn't
Oh my
that, isn't
God.
that crazy? Yeah.
Yeah, that's accurate. That's accurate. Those are great stories. I love them.
Yeah, those are awesome examples. We put you on the hot seat there, and you came up with 2 awesome stories. And I'm sure you could.
Oh, I
I'm
could
sure you could
go
go
on
on and tell so many other ones.
on and on and on. The self-taught video editor, the baker who built his own wood-fired oven just as a lark. He wasn't a baker, and he said he was a terrible baker for the first several years.
Oh, wow.
And then he got better at it. And then the way I found him was I was looking at magazines, and one of the food magazines listed his bread as one of the 10 best in the country.
Wow.
And
That's
so
awesome.
I looked him up. I mean, the research for this is a little odd. Sometimes I would go to Facebook groups or to Reddit and say, hey, anybody out there who used to be in the military and the military helped you make your way to doing this and such,
Wow, yeah.
and you're not a college graduate. Or sometimes it was, to find an underwater welder, and underwater welders are like the royalty of the welding profession, which
Yes.
is already an industry that needs more people and is paying very well. And this guy is paid very well. He's a true expert. The way I found him was by going to the top underwater welding companies in the country. So you start,
Wow.
it's all internet research. You find out who the top
Right.
rated underwater welding companies are. And I called them up and I explained to the owner what I was doing. He got excited about the project. He put me in touch with a few of his people, but I couldn't interview 4 underwater welders for the book. And he lives just outside of Yellowstone in this beautiful area. And then he goes on a job when he has to. The rest of the time he's arranging teams, he's organizing things. A lot of planning goes into underwater welding.
Yeah. That's awesome.
And obviously, like, listeners will know, like, that the theme of the podcast is being a good steward of the life that we're given. And young people, maybe they're finishing up high school, maybe they've gone through a gap year or 2 or 3 trying to figure out, like, what is this next step, or starting community college. And I love the approach that you take in the book, because it's not man, college is bad. But it's just like, hey, college just might not be for everyone. And so as we're having people that maybe they're listening to the podcast and they're catching them in the season of, they feel like their passions are a triangle trying to go into a square peg of college. How do you help people kind of evaluate whether or not college is the right route for them?
Yeah.
There's a whole chapter devoted to that.
Mm-hmm.
Actually, there are interactive quizzes to help you figure out, there's a list of the upsides of going to college and the downsides of going to college. And then there are quizzes that you take to look at, are you ready in various ways? Is this a good fit for you? As one expert said to me, if you hate high school, if you hate the reading, if you hate writing papers, if you just hated this whole thing, college is all that on steroids. So that's probably not a good match for you, or not a good match for you right now. He also told me that of people who go to college because they didn't know what else to do, which is a lot of people,
Yeah.
right? You go into college because it's what you do. You don't know what else you would possibly do.
Yeah.
Or who go because they were pressured by parents or peers or teachers. 59% of them say years afterward that college was a total waste.
Wow.
So, yeah, so, I am not, as you say, I am not anti-college. I hate this whole nasty debate that's going on, this whole quote unquote college is a scam, or, college isn't worth it. I believe in education, and I don't just believe in education for the sake of getting a job. I believe in education for the sake of being an educated person.
Yeah.
I think studying philosophy is still a very valid thing to go off to college and do.
Yeah.
You just have to have some kind of intentionality about why you're going to college.
Right.
Maybe your purpose will change. That's fine. Part of, I think, what makes great future employees is their willingness to be flexible and change directions. But you should have some intentionality and maturity that you're bringing to college experience, and the knowledge of why you're there. Maybe you'll find out that knowledge sort of changes on you. That's okay. But to just go there and think, I'm going to find what's of interest to me there. I'll just explore around. That's a bunch of very expensive exploring.
Sure.
As I talk about in the book, I majored in linguistics. I didn't major in journalism. I had no plans to become a journalist. I was going to be an academic because I did love linguistics. I didn't go in loving linguistics. I took a linguistics course, fell in love, said, this is what I want to do. And then at the beginning of senior year, I learned about what academics in linguistics actually do a lot of the time. And I thought, oh, that's not for me at all. I do not want to do that.
Yeah.
And so I had to do some very quick and objective and analytical analysis of myself and the kind of person I was, to think about what was I going to do.
Right.
And so I came up with journalism because I like learning about absolutely everything, but I only like learning about it to a certain extent. I don't want to be, an expert who's looking at the teeny tiny part of something. There are people who are great at that. I think that's terrific. I'm not one of them.
Yeah.
I do all my best work on deadline. I wrote all my best papers on deadline. I didn't take notes. I didn't make outlines. I just spread my materials around me. And I had my little Smith Corona typewriter, and I just typed it out right then and there.
I love it.
Awesome.
And so it was all, and I liked writing. So so it all kind of, and I needed to make money. I didn't need to make a ton of money. I've never really been into the idea of being wealthy. I just wanted to be able to get by, have a home, help support a family, so on and so forth. So it all added up to journalism, and it was a really great fit for me.
Yeah.
What I really don't know is why, when really my early passion in life as a child, even as a young child, was archaeology and paleontology, I sort of let that go by the wayside. Because I had been told by a lot of people that it was not a good career for women. And at that time it was tough for women, but I feel sort of ashamed that I let those people discourage me, because you know what? Back when I was a kid, and back before I was a kid, there were phenomenal female archaeologists. But I kind of let that go, didn't even study it at all in college. Right now, I'm going back to it. I decided, and it's time for me to start slowing down my journalism
Mm.
career.
Oh,
And
wow.
I've started going back to college part-time to study archaeology.
No
Oh,
way.
congratulations. That's
Yeah,
awesome.
that's amazing.
I actually did that because of my book. There's a section where I tell people how to look at community colleges to find the right programs for yourself.
Hmm.
Okay.
Going to your local community college is not usually the best step. You want to find the community college that has programs that you're really interested in.
Right,
Hmm.
right.
And so I had always looked at the local community colleges to see what courses they had in archaeology. And they had like one archaeology course. And I said, well, I can't do that. And I can't go back and redo my bachelor's all over again.
Hmm.
And by the
Right.
time I get a PhD at this age, I would be the relic that everybody's digging up instead of the person actually.
One, that's not
But
true, but
That's
also
not true, but
well played.
yeah.
That's a good joke. That's a good joke.
so I found out that things have changed, and there's now a career called archaeology field technician, which can be done with a
Okay.
certificate. And there's a college that is 50 miles from me, which, if you're in Southern California, 50 miles is nothing.
It's like
It's what
Texas.
5 miles is in most areas. So, and they have a phenomenal archaeology department, and they offer a 1 year certification in field archaeology.
Wow.
So I'm not going to do it in 1 year because I was still working for the Times and I was finishing up the book and so on and so forth. But I've taken 2 courses and I absolutely love it, just like I did as a kid.
Wow.
And within a year or two, I will be a certified field archaeological
Let's
technician.
go.
That's
That's
awesome.
awesome. Karen, I'm living for this. I want to kind of piggyback. You said so many things that I could ask questions about.
Hmm.
But so before I came to Vanderbloemen, I was actually in higher education and I was a graduate admissions counselor. And so a lot of the things you just touched on, I had a lot of conversations with graduate students or students hoping to be graduate students that were either 21, 22, and then a lot of adults that had gone on and they are now looking to change their career and other things. And it really was more of, I probably should have had a background in psychology at that point. It really was an admissions counselor. Like when it's for undergrad, it's a little different. But when you're talking to people that are really trying to decide, PA school, PT school, things that are going to cost them thousands, hundreds of thousands of dollars, things like that, I just kind of wanted to pick your brain on this. What advice would you give somebody, say they're finishing their undergrad degree, maybe they got it in something like you, and now they're like, I don't know, maybe I want to switch fields, maybe I want to do this. Maybe they have a degree in biology and they decided med school's not for them anymore. They want to do something else. What does that look like to kind of pivot and figure out your career when kind of our whole lives we've been told that your education is where your career comes from? I know for me, I have a degree in worship ministry. That is not what I do full time right now. I loved my degree and I learned so much and I'm really thankful for it. But that's not what I'm doing full time right now. That's not the thing that is paying my bills. And so what's kind of your advice for somebody when they're starting to kind of soul search in that process? You touched on it earlier that you kind of had to reflect for you, but what's your advice for people that are walking in that right now?
You really need to do a self-assessment like I did. You need to be very objective about yourself. You know what I called it when I said I like to learn about everything,
Yeah.
but only to a certain level. I said, face it, you're an intellectual dilettante, and
Yeah.
that's not the most flattering language to use
Sure.
about yourself, but it is what I am, and I have learned a lot about a lot of things by being one. So
Yeah.
it's learning who you really are, not getting down on yourself for what you really are, but thinking about what fields are going to fit with that. And I think actually for people who are in college, this book is just as useful because
Yeah.
you get to see the possibilities that are out there, plus you have the college degree. And for
Right.
most of those things, a college degree will be fine. It might not help you especially, it might help you especially. There are a couple of things where having a college degree could be a negative. Like there's a guy who is farming. He did a lot of travel and a lot of volunteer farming at organic farms around the world. And then he started his own farm in the San Juan Islands near Seattle, which is about the most beautiful place in the whole world. But to make sure that his farm is getting going, he occasionally does stints on tugboats, which pays incredibly well.
Hmm.
And on tugboats, you only work for a month and then you're off a month. So even
Okay.
if you wanted to do it full time. You can't. You can only do it 6 months out of the year,
Hmm.
but it pays phenomenally well. And he'll go and pick up a month on a tugboat after he got that experience, and to keep things going. So it's really about, take a look. And he said to me, no person with a bachelor's degree would get a job
Mm.
on the tugboats. They don't want to see bachelor's degrees. I guess I think it's a bunch of intellectuals who don't know how to do things. Actually, he later did go get his bachelor's degree, which a lot of people do. After they have a time to mature, after they have time to find out what is of interest to them, after they have time to experience it and know that it's really what they want to do, and that a bachelor's
Right.
degree will get them someplace or give them some enrichment as a person,
Mhm.
some intellectual growth, that they make better students and they make better applicants. I'm in these Facebook groups of parents who want their kids to go to elite colleges. And I'm in them just because I'm very curious. I join a lot of Facebook groups just
I love it.
finding out about different worlds. One of my
Yeah.
favorites is the costume design group. They're just a group of great people who are helping each other all the time. I can't even sew, but I love being in that group. But anyway, you read in these parent groups, oh, gee, should my child take their AP course in this or in that? Which one will Harvard look at more
Mm.
favorably? And you just want to sit there and go, oh, please relax. And by the way, what are you as a parent doing designing your child's high school career and their college applications? Sometimes it's even grandparents getting
Yeah.
involved. And I'm sitting there going, there is a value, even if they make mistakes, to your kid doing these things for
Yes.
themselves.
Yes. Yes.
So I think what really helps with college applications more is showing that you're an interesting person. I think colleges are looking
Mm.
for interesting people.
Yeah.
And I don't think one more AP course makes you all that interesting. I think what makes you interesting is you've gone out in the world, you've experienced things, you know who you are,
Yeah.
you know what you want. Maybe not perfectly, but you have done stuff and maybe you failed, and that makes you more interesting too.
Mhm.
So I think what you do is you look at the book, and there are a lot of possibilities in there, and you go out there and you start making contacts and you join a group.
Yeah.
Facebook is actually, it's not great as a social media, but it's great as a group former.
Mm.
There are fantastic groups there. I'm still a member of the underwater welding group, but I'm not sure why. I'm not getting as much out of that.
If I'm ever on Jeopardy, I'm calling Karen to help me
100%.
prep.
100%.
Yeah, and
If I call it up and I want to look at my feed, I almost never see things from my actual friends. It's all just
It's all groups.
group.
I love it. I love it, and I love, uh, just the book. How you'd mentioned kind of the questionnaire, the questions to help someone evaluate. I think that's so important for not just to like read a chapter and go yay or nay, but it's like help them wrestle with that as they're
Right.
already wrestling, and then here's some avenues. And I saw that there was like a real intentional thread throughout the book of uh, being active, to be seeking, talking about people who may be entrepreneurial in nature. And one of the things that I deal with a lot of students and people kind of in this next gen space, and uh, people tend to like the idea of being entrepreneurial, but do they have the right motor to be entrepreneurial? And being that, asking those questions, I think are really important. And I've seen students thrive in a space like that, or they're like, I don't want a boss and I want to be able to wear my sweatpants all day long. Like there's just a different mentality needed to be entrepreneurial,
Right.
and but we were talking about that a little bit earlier as we were prepping for the podcast of having a space to, I call it kind of fail forward,
Yeah.
is really important. And to fail forward, you said that makes you interesting. That helps kind of craft who you
Right,
are,
right.
lessons learned. And one of the things that we ask every guest, kind of just in conclusion, and we always glean something because everyone has a different story, a different path in this
Yeah.
life. And the question that we want to ask you is like, if you were to start your career all over again, what's something that you know now that you wish you would have known then?
I wish I had known that the one of the biggest skills I and almost everyone entering the world hoping for any kind of interesting and exciting career, the skill that does not get taught, and the one that I needed, is people skills, is the ability to empathize with people, the ability to listen to people,
Yeah.
the ability to network with people and see the great things about them, the ability to find mentors. I'm naturally a little bit, you wouldn't believe this from this talk, but I am naturally a little reserved in a large crowd of people. I tend to go to a corner of the room. Um, and I needed to learn people are actually terrific, which if I ever needed more lessons than that, this book has really taught me that. Every story in this book, and I think the story, there's a lot of practical information about what are the different fields you can go into, how do you go into them, who
Right.
are the employers who are hiring people without college degrees, because that's really increasing. Though, so I learned about that, but I think the best thing people get is the stories of the people who have done it, because those are applicable in so many areas.
Right.
And what I saw over and over for most of those people are, and they're all super smart, but beyond that, there's this willingness to be unconventional, to be fully themselves, to be, I wouldn't say fearless, but low in fear. A little fear is good for all of us, right? We don't want to be outright stupid, but to be low in fear, but they also are great with people and they think in deeper terms about what they do. And, I talked to one young man who's studying to be an auto mechanic, and the depth with which he thinks about this and the kind of growth he wants to do as a person, and how he loves how he's always learning something new. And then he said, you would think that being an auto mechanic, you just go and you do the standard things. And he was saying, cars, they are full of secrets.
Yeah.
So, that ability to see the excitement, to relate to other people, to really be fully a part of the world, I think is so attractive to employers. Employers keep saying it. They keep saying we need people who know how to work with people. We
Yeah.
need networking skills. I think colleges do a great job with critical thinking skills. I also think you can learn critical thinking skills in a million different ways.
Sure.
College is one place to do that. But nobody really teaches networking skills, or people, even psychology classes at the undergraduate level don't really teach empathy and understanding and
Yeah.
reaching out and seeing what's beautiful about other people. And I think I would have done that so much earlier if I had known.
I love that. I think that I'm thankful that that's becoming more of a resource, I feel like, today, being able to be honest, transparent, have those conversations, join the Facebook group that you know nothing about these people, but it starts networking you and you get to learn more people, and you don't have that narrow mind of the field that you're in. But like the fact that you have an extensive knowledge on sewing things and you can't sew, or underwater welding and that's not a career you ever want for yourself, things like that just kind of help you become well-rounded. And so I love what you had to say, Karin. Thank you so much for giving up time today to chat with us. I know that this book is going to be an incredible resource for a lot of people, and especially a lot of our listeners, on how to steward life, and people that are in that gap year, or maybe they're your age thinking about going back to community college, and they're going to get to hear this story and hear kind of what's been happening with you. And so just thank you so much for your time. We really appreciate it and really enjoyed this conversation.
This has been great.
Thank you, guys. I love being here.
Thank you so much for listening to A Higher Purpose, a Vanderbloomen podcast. If you would like to listen to our other episodes, you can find them at vanderbloomen.com/podcasts. You can also listen to them anywhere that you stream your podcasts, such as Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or anywhere else. Follow us on social media, because you'll be getting updates from us about the new episodes that we're releasing. You can find us on X, Instagram, as well as LinkedIn and Facebook. Thank you so much again for listening, and we'll see you next time.